Hands on the hood. Now. The words hit like a thunderclap. Loud. Jarring. Unmistakable. Jamal Carter froze, keys still dangling from his hand, just moments after locking his sleek black Mercedes AMG in front of his own office building. The late afternoon sun reflected off the car's polished chrome, casting sharp flares that made the scene look almost cinematic. But this was no movie. He turned slowly, heart pounding, confused. 3 police officers had jumped out of 2 patrol cars, weapons holstered, but hands hovering too close for comfort. One of them, a stocky officer with a clenched jaw and mirrored sunglasses, repeated his command, voice cold and sharp. "Hands on the hood," I said. Jamal's instincts told him to comply. This wasn't the time for questions. Not yet. He took a breath and placed his hands on the warm hood of his own car, careful not to make any sudden movements. His suit jacket rode up slightly, revealing the fine stitching of an Armani label, the silver cufflinks at his wrists glinting under the sun. But none of that seemed to matter. A small group of bystanders across the street started to gather. A few people paused their walks, some pulled out their phones. The world, it seemed, slowed down. One woman whispered, "Isn't that the CEO from Carter Tech?" Jamal didn't look up. He wasn't about to make the mistake of appearing aggressive or uncooperative. He'd read the stories. He knew how quickly things could escalate. "Sir," Jamal said carefully, tried to keep his voice calm. "What's going on here?" "We got a report of a stolen vehicle," the officer replied without blinking. "This car fits the description. You match the suspect's general profile." Jamal blinked. General profile. Black male. Late 30s. Driving a black luxury sedan. Another officer added, voice devoid of emotion, as if that was enough to stop anyone on the street. "This car is mine. Registered in my name. I just left a meeting in that building," Jamal said, tilting his head toward the Carter Tech glass tower behind them. His name, Jamal Carter, was literally engraved on the plaque at the building's front entrance. CEO and founder. 10 years of blood, sweat, and brilliance, none of which seemed to register with the officers. One officer approached the driver's side, checking the VIN on the dashboard. Another demanded Jamal's license and registration. "They're in my inside jacket pocket," Jamal said, pausing. "I'm going to reach slowly." "Do it," the lead officer barked, hand twitching near his holster. Jamal slowly reached inside, pulling out his wallet and then the registration from the glove compartment when instructed. He handed over the documents, watching as the officers examined them. "You mind telling me how long you've had this car?" the second officer asked, almost accusingly. "For months. I paid cash," Jamal answered, voice flat. "Interesting," the officer muttered, as if that answer was suspicious. "You got proof of purchase?" "You're holding it," Jamal said evenly, keeping his hands visible. "Registration. Insurance. My name's on everything." By now, a teenager nearby had pulled out his phone and was filming. "This is messed up," the teen said. "That's the Carter Tech guy. He's legit." One of the officers turned and waved him off. "Move along." "No, I think I'll stay right here," the kid said defiantly. Still, the cops continued their procedure, running his license, checking the VIN again, whispering into radios. Jamal stood there quietly, feeling every second stretch like a punishment. He glanced up just once, catching his own reflection in the office windows across the street. Tie still straight, face calm. But inside, he was boiling. He thought of his daughter. He was supposed to pick her up from school in 15 minutes. He thought of his board meeting earlier that day, where he presented the next quarter's AI initiative with a smile. None of that seemed to matter now. To these officers, he was just another black man in a car that seemed too expensive for someone like him to legally own. "You don't mind if we check the trunk, do you?" the lead cop asked, not waiting for a real answer. "What are you looking for?" Jamal asked. "Anything out of the ordinary?" "I prefer not. This is harassment at this point." "You refusing a search?" I'm refusing because you have no probable cause. That response seemed to agitate the officer. He stepped closer, almost nose to nose with Jamal. Look, you can either cooperate or we take you downtown. Jamal stood his ground. I've cooperated. Gave you my license, registration, insurance. You've verified it's my vehicle. What more do you want? Silence. Then, a static-filled voice came through the police radio. Dispatch to Unit 2. Vehicle confirmed, not stolen. Registered owner is a Jamal Carter. Repeat, vehicle not reported stolen. All documents are clean. The officers looked at each other. One sighed. Another shrugged. Well, looks like you're good to go, the lead officer muttered. That's it, Jamal said. No apology? Nothing. Just doing our job, sir. You fit the description. Jamal stepped back, dusting off his sleeves, every movement deliberate. You have no idea who I am, he said quietly. Oh, we do now, the officer smirked. Jamal looked at him for a long moment, his eyes calm but fierce. No, you really don't. He walked around to the driver's side, opened the door, and paused. People were still watching, some cheering quietly. One woman shouted, "We got your back, Mr. Carter." As Jamal pulled away, he didn't speed. He didn't slam the door. But he did dial a number on his car's dashboard and said 6 words that would change everything. Start the review. Full internal audit. And with that, the wheels of justice began to turn. As Jamal's Mercedes glided away from the scene, the officers stood in silence, watching him vanish behind a veil of red tail lights. To them, it was just another day, another misunderstanding, another incident they forget by morning. But Jamal, he would remember this moment forever, not because of how they treated him, but because of what it revealed. He didn't drive straight home. Instead, he pulled into a quiet parking lot near his daughter's school and shut off the engine. The silence in the car felt louder than the sirens earlier. He leaned back in the seat, staring up at the car's suede ceiling, breathing slow and steady. What just happened? He wasn't angry in the explosive kind of way. No, this was a different burn, a deep, quiet fury that boiled beneath the surface like magma. Controlled, focused, and dangerous. He reached for his phone and scrolled through the recent call logs until he found the name, Tanya Marshall, his executive assistant. He tapped her contact. "Mr. Carter," she answered instantly. "Are you all right? We saw something online. Someone filmed." "It was me," he said, voice low. "Give me everything on Sergeant Whitman. Personnel files. Complaints. I want them on my desk tomorrow." "Yes, sir. I already have our legal team flagging the footage going viral. It's on 4 platforms already. Do you want to release a statement?" "Not yet," Jamal said, looking out the window at a row of children laughing on the schoolyard grass. "Let them talk. Let the world see it raw. I'm not here to protect anyone this time." He ended the call. The thing is, Jamal had played this game before. He'd been the kid whose teacher called the cops when he stayed too long after school to use the library. The teen who got followed through department stores. The college student stopped at TSA for random checks 10 times in 1 month. He learned to stay calm, to cooperate, to prove himself over and over again. But being calm didn't mean being passive. And today crossed a line. He reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a small leather binder. Inside were private contact cards, state leaders, business elites, high-level security advisors, and more. He found the one marked OIG, Internal Affairs. He knew that department inside and out. He had helped design the civilian oversight protocols for it just last year. When Jamal Carter spoke, the right people listened. Meanwhile, the video had already taken on a life of its own. On social media, it was being stitched with hashtags like #DrivingWhileBlack and #NotAFitTheft. One comment read, "This man built $1 million company and still gets treated like a criminal." Another said, "They had his documents, saw his ID, and still made him sit like a suspect. Disgusting." Even some retired officers chimed in. One wrote, "There was no probable cause. That was straight-up profiling. Inside the police department, Sergeant Whitman wasn't worried at first. He'd done this before. He'd stop someone who fit the description, run the plates, maybe lecture them, then walk away without paperwork or oversight. He didn't write things down unless he had to. That was the game. But this time, things felt different. He walked into the precinct the next morning and noticed the odd hush in the air. A few glances from fellow officers. A long stare from the new deputy chief. The captain's door was closed, unusual for a Thursday morning. By noon, a memo circulated quietly. All personnel involved in yesterday's vehicle stop under internal review. Hold off all external press inquiries. Whitman gritted his teeth. Internal review, he muttered. Since when? He walked into the break room and turned on the TV, just in time to see a morning anchor say the words that sent a chill through his spine. Sources confirm the man wrongfully stopped by officers yesterday is Jamal Carter, CEO of Carter Tech Industries and board member on the State Civilian Oversight Commission, the same commission currently evaluating systemic bias in local law enforcement. Whitman's face dropped. Jamal Carter wasn't just another guy with a fancy car. He was one of the people with the power to shake the entire structure. Back in the car, Jamal sat quietly as his daughter climbed in, swinging her backpack into the back seat. "Hey, Daddy," she smiled. "You okay?" He looked over at her and smiled, softening. "Yeah, better now." She buckled in, then paused. "Hey, you're on TikTok." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Already?" She nodded. "People are mad for you. Like really mad." Jamal started the engine, and as the car purred to life, so did something inside him. This wasn't about revenge. It was about revealing a truth. Because if this could happen to him, someone with influence, status, and undeniable proof of ownership, what was happening to the countless others who didn't have a title, a camera, or a voice? He wouldn't let it slide this time. Not for himself. Not for his daughter. Not for anyone. As they drove away, his fingers tapped rhythmically on the leather steering wheel, not to music, but to resolve. Calculating. Quiet. Precise. The world had just witnessed injustice in broad daylight. Now, it was time for daylight to expose everything else hiding in the shadows. Jamal arrived at his office the next morning earlier than usual, walking through the glass doors of Carter Tech with an expression that was calm, but unreadable. Every employee who passed him in the hallway offered a nod, a silent acknowledgement, not just of his title, but of what they had all seen online. No one needed to ask what happened. The video was everywhere now. He entered the executive wing, and Tanya, his assistant, was already waiting with a tablet and a file folder. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. Here's everything you asked for on Sergeant Whitman. Internal affairs reports, prior complaints, civilian testimonies. I had our legal team cross-reference every document." Jamal took the folder, flipping it open as they walked into his office. "How many formal complaints?" 6 in the last 4 years. 3 related to excessive force, 2 for racially biased stops, and 1 for retaliatory behavior after a citizen filmed him during a traffic encounter. Disciplinary actions? Minimal. 1 suspension, 2 days, unpaid. Everything else was swept under the rug. Jamal exhaled. "That stops now." He sat down behind his desk and pulled up his calendar. Today was critical. Not only was the footage from the stop going viral, but the State Civilian Oversight Committee, which Jamal was an appointed board member of, was holding its quarterly closed-door review on law enforcement behavior and leadership accountability, specifically targeting departments with high complaint rates. And guess who had just entered their radar at the worst possible time? The city's police chief, Raymond Klein. Jamal picked up his phone and dialed a direct number. No assistant, no middleman. The line rang once. Chairwoman Lewis answered a familiar voice on the other end. "Claire, it's Jamal. I saw the video." "Then you already know I won't be silent during today's session. I wouldn't expect you to. But you understand what this means, right? There's going to be pushback. Political, Legal, union pressure. Klein is friends. Jamal stood and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling city streets below. And so do I. But unlike Klein, I have receipts. The call ended without another word. They didn't need to say more. The war had already begun. The battleground wasn't the street. It was the boardroom, the press, the court of public opinion. While Jamal prepared for the review, Sergeant Whitman was having a very different kind of morning. He stood in front of Chief Klein's desk, arms folded tightly, eyes restless. The chief, a grizzled man with white hair and a permanent scowl, looked up from his laptop and scowled even deeper. "You made the news, Tom." Whitman shifted on his feet. "I was doing my job. That guy fit the report. I didn't know who he was." "You didn't have to know," Klein snapped. "You had his ID, registration. You still detained him. Publicly. And now he's the face of scandal. Come on, Ray. How was I supposed to know the guy's a billionaire CEO with connections?" "You weren't," the chief growled, slamming the laptop shut. "But you should have used your brain. And now, he's got the damn oversight committee on fire." Whitman lowered his voice, unsure. "You think he's going to try something?" Klein leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Try something? He's not trying. He's already moving." At that exact moment, Jamal was finalizing his submission to the committee. A detailed, time-stamped report with supporting video footage, audio logs, and civilian accounts, all formatted and color-coded by Tanya and Carter Tekka's legal advisors. He didn't want vengeance. He wanted structural change. He wanted accountability. But first, he needed the system to admit it had a problem. At noon, Jamal entered the Oversight Committee's chamber. Glass walls, high ceilings, long wooden table. The room was filled with a mixture of civilian leaders, retired judges, legal analysts, and community organizers. Every person in the room had seen the video. Many looked up from their notes as he entered, some with nods of solidarity, others with cautious curiosity. "Mr. Carter," Chairwoman Lewis said, gesturing toward his seat. "Madam Chair," he replied, setting down his folder, voice steady. "I'd like to open today's review with a first-hand account of misconduct involving the Midtown Police Department, specifically Officer Thomas Whitman and the administrative failure of Chief Raymond Klein." He opened the folder and slid the video link onto the table's shared screen. The room went silent as the clip played. They watched the officers surround Jamal, heard the accusations, saw the license in his hand, saw him sit on the curb, and then heard the dispatch confirm the car was his. When the video ended, there was a moment of thick silence. Jamal looked around the room, then spoke. "If this is how I'm treated, with wealth, with credentials, with documentation, imagine how someone without any of that is treated. Imagine how many voices never make it into this room." He didn't need to raise his voice. The truth was loud enough. Chairwoman Lewis leaned forward. "Your testimony has been received, Mr. Carter. And let me assure you, it will shape today's decisions." As the review moved forward, Jamal didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He had said everything, not with anger, but with evidence, with grace, and with an iron will. Outside, protesters were beginning to gather in front of the precinct. Reporters were circling the story. And back in his office, Jamal's daughter watched her father on the live stream, eyes wide, heart full of pride. She turned to her teacher and whispered, "That's my dad. He's not just a boss. He's a builder. He fixes broken things." The boardroom doors closed with a heavy click behind Jamal, but the ripple of his words continued to echo through every corridor of power. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't begged for justice. He had simply shown the truth, undeniable, unfiltered, and unforgiving. Back at Midtown Police Department, Chief Raymond Klein's office was in chaos. A stack of printed tweets sat on his desk, headlines circled in red ink, each more damning than the last. CEO humiliated by police, despite proof of ownership. Officer suspended in viral traffic stop fallout. Civilian oversight eyes Midtown PD after racial profiling incident. Klein slammed his fist down, making his coffee mug rattle. This is spiraling, he muttered to himself. His phone buzzed again. Another media inquiry. Another voice he didn't want to hear. His public relations officer had already quit that morning, unable to spin a story this ugly without destroying her reputation. And then came the call he couldn't ignore. A private line. No caller ID. But he recognized the tone immediately. "Raymond," said the governor's liaison. "We're not pleased." Klein cleared his throat, trying to sound in control. "It's being handled." "It's not being handled," the voice snapped. "The man you allowed your department to humiliate is now the center of a national conversation. You've got protesters outside the building, 2 state senators tweeting statements, and a civilian oversight board on fire." Klein didn't reply. "Do you even realize who Jamal Carter is?" The voice continued. "He's not just a CEO. He has friends on every reform panel we've tried to avoid. He's the kind of man who doesn't scream. He drafts legislation. I understand that now. Well, it's a little late. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Klein rubbed his temples, the weight of his career pressing down harder than ever. Meanwhile, outside the department building, tension buzzed in the air. People gathered with signs. "Stop profiling. Start reform. Accountability now. Justice for Jamal." What had started as a video had become a movement. Activists, students, lawyers, parents, all united by the same rage. Not just at what happened to one man, but at what it revealed about an entire system. In the middle of the crowd stood Marcus Fields, a former community organizer and longtime Midtown resident. He raised a megaphone. They treated that man like a suspect because of the color of his skin, not the content of his ID. And we've seen this story before, but this time, the man they targeted is powerful, and he's not staying silent. Cheers erupted. Reporters captured it all. And from his office window, Chief Klein watched nervously as the tide turned. At Carter Tech, Jamal sat at his desk, completely composed. He had no intention of responding emotionally. He wasn't interested in public apologies or damage control. That was too easy. He was focused on building consequences. Tanya walked in quietly. "We've received an unofficial request for a private meeting." "With who?" "Chief Klein." Jamal looked up slowly. "He reached out to me?" "No. Through a back channel. His office is in panic mode. He wants to meet off the record." Jamal stared at her for a long moment. "Set it up." Tanya raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" He nodded. "I want to see what panic looks like in person." Later that evening, in a discreet office space away from cameras and reporters, the 2 men met. Klein looked older than his photos. The weight of leadership, corrupted by years of avoidance, hung heavy on his shoulders. Jamal, however, looked calm, almost surgical. The chief tried to begin with an apology. "Mr. Carter, let me say—" "No need," Jamal interrupted. "This isn't about feelings. It's about systems. You oversaw a department that allowed this to happen. Worse, you normalized it. I had no idea Whitman had that many complaints. Internal affairs. You signed off on his promotions." Klein fell silent. Jamal leaned forward, his voice still calm. "You think this is about one man and one car. But what happened to me could have ended very differently. If I wasn't calm. If there weren't cameras. If I didn't have resources. And even with all of that, you still treated me like a criminal." Klein swallowed hard. "What are you going to do?" "That depends on you," Jamal replied. "Step down. Take Whitman with you. If you don't, I'll take this to federal oversight. I'll organize policy leaders, civil rights attorneys, and I'll turn every bit of this department's dirty laundry into national headlines." Klein's jaw tensed. "You'd really blow up the department over this." "No," Jamal said. "You already did. I'm just shining a light on the wreckage." The 2 men stared at each other in silence, the air between them thick with everything unsaid. Then Jamal stood. "I'll give you 24 hours. Make it clean, or I'll make it loud." He left without another word. Klein sat back, defeated. That night, Midtown PD issued a carefully worded statement. Effective immediately, Chief Raymond Klein is stepping down from his position. Officer Thomas Whitman has been placed on administrative leave, pending a formal review. Jamal didn't smile. He didn't post. He didn't celebrate, because he knew this wasn't justice. It was only the beginning. The news spread like wildfire. Before dawn, every major local outlet had picked up the story. By mid-morning, national headlines followed. Police chief resigns after viral incident with Black Tech CEO. Cable news anchors debated whether this marked a turning point in police accountability, or just another temporary storm the system would weather and forget. But for Jamal Carter, none of it felt like victory. He stood in his kitchen that morning, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly as the TV buzzed in the background. The footage of his roadside humiliation now played side by side with official press conferences and political statements. A spokesperson for the governor praised the swift and appropriate response. The mayor issued a tweet about commitment to equality. It all sounded so rehearsed, so clean. His daughter padded into the kitchen in fuzzy slippers, hair still messy from sleep. "They're talking about you again," she said, rubbing her eyes. Jamal turned and gave her a small smile. "Yeah, I figured. You're not mad." He hesitated, then crouched down to meet her eye level. "I'm not mad. I'm focused. There's a difference." She tilted her head. "Are you going to fix all the cops?" He chuckled, a soft, weary sound. "I'm going to try to fix what I can, one piece at a time." Outside his home, camera crews had started to gather. Tanya had already alerted a private security team to keep them back. Jamal didn't want interviews. He didn't want the spotlight. What he wanted was structural change. And now that Chief Klein was gone, he finally had the opening he needed. At Carter Tech HQ, his legal and policy teams were already working around the clock. Tanya briefed him on the morning's progress as he entered the boardroom. "Internal Affairs is launching a full departmental audit," she said. "Several officers have come forward anonymously. They're confirming long-term patterns of abuse. We've got a paper trail of ignored complaints, falsified traffic stop logs, even racial quota rumors." Jamal sat at the head of the table and tapped a pen against the folder in front of him. "Good. We're going to hand everything over. But we're not just going to report it. We're going to rebuild the response system from the ground up." "How?" asked one of the junior policy analysts. "The department is already under fire. The union's going to fight back. And if we come in swinging too hard, we might lose momentum." "We're not coming in swinging," Jamal said. "We're coming in with solutions." He reached for the remote and clicked the screen at the end of the room to life. A slide appeared. CARE Initiative, Community Accountability, Reform, and Equity. 3 years ago, he began, "We built this framework for a city that ultimately rejected it. Said it was too ambitious, too disruptive. But now," he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Now the city is begging for reform." He flipped through slides showing a tech-driven platform for real-time civilian complaints, a decentralized body-worn camera archive accessible to independent review boards, a retraining program led by ex-officers and community leaders. "We're going to make Midtown the national blueprint," he said, "not by tearing the system down, but by reprogramming it with transparency and accountability as defaults." As the presentation ended, the room erupted in focused energy. Questions, timelines, pilot testing sites. Everyone in that room knew what was at stake. And for the first time in a long time, hope didn't feel naive. It felt tactical. But outside Carter Tech, not everyone was thrilled. Officer Thomas Whitman sat in his apartment, blinds drawn, phone buzzing with messages he didn't answer. He watched the press conference on mute, reading the captions like they were written in a different language. He had been on paid leave for barely 2 days, but the silence was eating him alive. "This is crazy," he muttered. "All I did was stop a guy." But even he didn't believe that anymore. His partner, who had refused to speak to the press, had texted him the night before. "We messed up. Bad. Whitman had stared at that message for hours, not because he disagreed, but because he didn't know what to do with the guilt. He wasn't just suspended. He was the face of everything wrong with the system. And he knew, deep down, that it wasn't just about one stop. There had been others. Dozens. Times when he'd let his assumptions guide him more than any actual threat. Times when he treated people like problems to solve, not humans to understand. Now, he was being forced to look in a mirror. And what he saw staring back terrified him. Back at Carter Tech, Jamal walked into his private office and sat down at his desk. Tanya entered with a folder in hand. "Request just came in," she said. "City officials want you to consider joining a temporary task force to help transition the department. Leadership restructuring, policy revisions, oversight guidelines." Jamal looked at the offer for a long moment. He had spent his whole life building one empire, his company. But maybe this was the legacy that mattered most. He opened the folder, skimmed the contents, and then looked up. "Set the first meeting. You're really doing this?" Tanya asked. He nodded. "If not me, then who?" Outside, the press still waited. Inside, a movement had begun, not just led by Jamal Carter, but powered by a truth that could no longer be ignored. This wasn't just about one man clearing his name. It was about rewriting the story for everyone who never got the chance to tell theirs. The council chamber was packed. Jamal Carter sat alone at the long table facing the Midtown City Council. Every camera in the room focused on him. Flashbulbs popped. Journalists whispered into their recorders. Across from him, elected officials reviewed their papers, most trying to maintain the illusion of neutrality, but some unable to hide their discomfort. After all, they knew what this moment meant. They weren't just hearing testimony. They were watching power shift. "Mr. Carter," said Councilwoman Harris, adjusting her glasses, "thank you for agreeing to speak today regarding the transition plan for our police department. We understand this is not your usual domain." Jamal leaned forward, calm but commanding. "Public safety is my domain, Councilwoman. The safety of my employees, my daughter, my community. It always has been." That struck a nerve. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone carried the weight of every injustice that had gone unspoken, every hand shoved off the wheel of change before it even touched it. "Let me be clear," Jamal continued. "This is not about personal vengeance. This is about systemic correction. What happened to me was visible only because of my wealth and status. But this system fails people every single day. People without cameras, without lawyers, without CEOs in their contacts list." Murmurs filled the chamber. He clicked the button on his tablet, and the overhead screen lit up with a sobering chart. Decades of data on racial profiling, traffic stops, and internal investigations in Midtown. The trend was horrifying, yet consistent. Over-policing, under-accountability, a broken feedback loop. "This isn't a rogue officer issue," Jamal said. "This is an architecture issue. And if the city wants my help fixing it, then we start by changing the blueprints." Councilman Dorsey, an older white official with a history of deflecting on reform, cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, while we appreciate your perspective, don't you think it's dangerous to use one incident to judge an entire department?" Jamal didn't flinch. "This isn't one incident, sir. This is 1,000 invisible incidents finally dragged into the light." That silenced Dorsey for good. The crowd behind him, mostly community members, erupted in quiet applause. The moderators quickly asked for order, but the tone of the meeting had shifted. Jamal wasn't just participating. He was leading. He laid out the CARE initiative step by step: transparent hiring protocols, third-party complaint auditing, body cam footage accessible by independent oversight boards, and retraining led by neutral community experts. There was no guesswork. It was calculated, evidence-backed, and already partially funded by Carter Tech's community outreach arm. "Let's stop pretending we need a decade to fix what we broke in a year," he said. "What we need is courage and accountability." Later, As the council recessed, several members approached him quietly, thanking him for his leadership. Privately, of course. They weren't ready to endorse him on record. Not yet. But someone else was. Outside the chamber, a woman in uniform stood silently near the steps. Her nameplate read, Lieutenant Naomi Stokes. She had been Midtown PD for 18 years. Black, decorated, overlooked for promotion 5 times. Mr. Carter, she said with a nod, I've been waiting for someone like you to walk into that room for a long time. Jamal studied her. She wasn't just being polite. There was something else in her tone, resolve. I know who you are, he said. Your reputation precedes you. I've written more reports on internal misconduct than I care to count, she said. Most of them were ignored. Some were shredded. But I still believe in this uniform. He nodded slowly. And I believe in people like you wearing it. Naomi hesitated, then reached in her coat pocket and handed him a sealed manila envelope. What's this? He asked. Proof. Everything you need to show how deep the rot goes. Internal memos, backdated complaints, whistleblower statements, even footage they thought was erased. Jamal took the envelope and felt the weight of it. Why now? Because you're the first person who actually might do something with it, she said, voice steady. But this time, don't just expose them. Replace them. She turned and walked away without another word. That night, Jamal sat in his study with Tanya and a few key members of his task force. The contents of Naomi's envelope were spread across the desk, dozens of damning documents. Officers who joked openly about quotas. A commander who dismissed racial profiling claims as cultural misunderstanding. Body cam footage showing a young black teen being dragged from a bus stop and searched for looking suspicious. Tanya shook her head, furious. This is a gold mine and a graveyard. Jamal closed the folder. We released this to the public in 2 waves. First, to wake them up. Second, to show them the alternative. And what's the alternative? Tanya asked. Jamal didn't hesitate. Lieutenant Stokes, he said. She becomes interim chief. If we want trust, we start by elevating the people who never betrayed it. Tanya smiled, then leaned back in her chair. You're serious about this? As serious as they were when they put me in cuffs, Jamal said. This isn't about revenge. This is about reset. Outside, the city lights blinked in rhythm, unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding behind closed doors. But soon the whole city would know. This wasn't the end of scandal. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The press conference was set for noon, but by 11:10, the steps of City Hall were already flooded with reporters, activists, curious citizens, and more cameras than anyone could count. The energy was electric, tense, expectant. Midtown hadn't seen this much attention since the mayoral election, but this time, the buzz wasn't about politics. It was about justice, and everyone was waiting to see if Jamal Carter would deliver it. Jamal stood inside the building, calm but composed, dressed not in a tailored suit, but in a simple black sweater and slacks. A deliberate choice. This moment wasn't about boardroom optics. It was about speaking directly to the people. Tanya stood beside him, tablet in hand, flanked by Carter Tech's public affairs lead and a pair of community organizers. They had rehearsed the plan all night. You sure you want to do this? Tanya asked, scanning his face. I have to, Jamal said. They handed me a microphone. I won't waste it. Outside, a hush fell across the crowd as Jamal stepped up to the podium. Microphones from every major news outlet pointed toward him like arrows. Flashbulbs sparked. Drones hovered. And somewhere in the distance, a protester banged a pot rhythmically. An urban drumbeat for a city on the edge of transformation. Good afternoon, Jamal began, his voice steady. 2 weeks ago, I was handcuffed at my own yacht party, profiled by a woman who assumed that a black man couldn't possibly belong among the wealthy guests he was entertaining. He paused as the crowd murmured. What followed wasn't just an embarrassment. It was a revelation. Not for me. I've known how this system works all my life. But for others. For those who thought money insulated you, that power meant protection. That respect was automatic. He leaned slightly toward the mic. I learned that day that no matter how high I rise, some people will always see me as less. But I also realized that I'm not alone, and I'm not powerless. The screens behind him came alive. Documents from the sealed envelope Naomi had given him. Footage, testimony, whistleblower statements. It was like watching a courtroom trial unfold in real time, and the city was the jury. People gasped. Reporters took frantic notes. A few council members watching from the side exchanged looks of panic. Today, I'm releasing a report compiled by my team and courageous insiders within the Midtown Police Department. These documents expose systemic negligence, racial profiling, falsified stop reports, and deliberate efforts to silence officers who spoke up. A particularly chilling clip played on the screen, an officer laughing about making a quota of black drivers before lunch. The silence in the crowd turned to rage. "I will not stand here and just call this shameful," Jamal said. "I'm calling it actionable, which is why, as of this morning, we have filed a formal petition with the city to remove Police Chief Ronald Kinley from his position, effective immediately." The crowd erupted. Cheers, chants, applause. Even some officers standing along the barricades looked stunned, but not angry. Some even looked relieved. "And I am proposing Lieutenant Naomi Stokes as interim chief," Jamal continued. "She is a decorated officer who has spent nearly 2 decades fighting for reform from within. It's time she had the authority to lead the change she's been pushing for." Naomi, standing quietly near the steps, bowed her head slightly as the camera shifted to her. She hadn't expected him to say her name publicly. Not yet. But Jamal knew timing was everything. Behind him, Tanya gave a small nod. The transition plan was already in motion. "I'm not asking for perfection from the new department," Jamal said, "but I am demanding accountability, transparency, humanity." Then, as the press prepared for a flood of questions, Jamal raised his hand. "One last thing," he said. The screen flickered again, this time showing a new initiative banner, the Carter Pledge. For any corporate leader watching, any tech founder, executive, or investor, don't just post a black square on Instagram. Join me. I'm launching a pledge, and I'm starting with my own company. 10% of our annual community budget will now go toward independent oversight programs, police reform initiatives, and mental health support for neighborhoods affected by decades of overpolicing. The press burst into activity again. This wasn't just a media moment. This was a blueprint, and it was already happening. Jamal stepped down from the podium to thunderous applause. Naomi met him halfway. The two didn't shake hands. They embraced briefly. It was a quiet, respectful acknowledgement of shared burden and shared vision. "I thought I was going to be alone in this," she said under her breath. "You were," Jamal replied, "but not anymore." As they turned toward the crowd, a chant started from somewhere in the back, rolling forward like a wave. "This is what change looks like. This is what change looks like." Back inside the building, Jamal took a breath. Tanya followed him into a side hallway, already fielding calls. CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times. The city had exploded, and Jamal had lit the fuse, not with anger, but with calm, unapologetic leadership. "You just changed the game," Tanya said. He shook his head. "No, I just reminded people they had the power to change it themselves." Outside, the chant echoed louder. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was a movement, and it had only just begun. The aftermath of the press conference wasn't just noise. It was a cultural earthquake. Within hours, hashtags exploded across social media. Hashtag Carter Pledge, hashtag Naomi for Chief, and hashtag Not Just Guess. Major outlets picked up the footage. National headlines read, "Black tech billionaire exposes police chief in stunning press conference." And within 24 hours, Chief Ronald Kinley was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But for Jamal Carter, the real work had only just begun. The next morning, Jamal sat at the breakfast bar in his penthouse, not as a CEO preparing for another board meeting, but as a man staring at the tidal wave of reaction his truth had triggered. His phone was buzzing nonstop, politicians wanting meetings, advocacy groups reaching out, business leaders pledging support. Yet none of that felt as heavy as the handwritten letter sitting in front of him. It was from a mother on the South Side. Her son, Jamal Red, had been stopped and searched 6 times in 1 month on his way to school. No tickets, no record, just humiliation. She ended the note with, "Thank you for speaking up when you could have stayed silent. My boy saw your press conference. Now he believes he can be something." That, more than all the headlines, brought a lump to Jamal's throat. He looked out at the skyline. The city looked the same, but something had shifted, not just in him, but in everyone watching. The question was, what came next? Later that day, Jamal met Naomi at the community center Carter Tech had funded last year, a place originally built for tech literacy classes and after-school programs, now buzzing with new life. Activists, retired officers, teachers, church leaders, and volunteers packed in a meeting room for what Naomi called a first step gathering. "You sure you want to be part of this?" she asked Jamal as they entered the back entrance. "You're the face of this now. That's a lot of pressure." He nodded. "I didn't ask to be the face, but if I've got the mic, I'll use it until it breaks." The meeting was raw, messy, and real. One man stood up and said, "I've been arrested 9 times for things white folks don't even get warnings for. You think firing one chief fixes that?" Another woman, a retired cop, said, "I've been called a traitor for reporting my partner. You want more Naomi Stokes? Then protect us when we speak." Jamal didn't interrupt. He listened. Every testimony, every voice was a piece of the puzzle. Naomi jotted notes with furious energy. When Jamal finally did speak, it wasn't a lead, but to ask, what would safety really look like if we build it from scratch? That single question turned the room. What followed was 2 hours of unfiltered ideas. Street medics instead of armed responders, mental health counselors embedded in schools, independent civilian boards with budgetary power over precincts, real-time transparency dashboards, anonymous officer feedback tools, trauma-informed training from people who had lived it. "This isn't a brainstorm anymore," Naomi said, glancing around the energized room. "It's a blueprint." Over the next week, Jamal put his resources behind what became known as the Carter Framework, a living model for community-led public safety reform, backed not just by policy papers, but by real-time pilot programs. Midtown became ground zero. Carter Tech offered data support and logistics. Naomi built a transition team that included survivors, reformers, and yes, even a few good cops left who were ready to risk their careers to change the system from the inside. But with every success came new resistance. On the 6th day after the press conference, a tabloid ran a smear article. "Yacht billionaire wants to defund the police." Talk shows debated if Jamal was a hero or a threat. Anonymous death threats started trickling in. His security team had a double. He wasn't surprised, just disappointed. Late that night, Jamal sat alone on his balcony, overlooking the river. The city was quiet. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if the storm is over or just circling back. Tanya joined him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You knew it would get ugly," she said softly. He nodded. "I just didn't think it had happened this fast." She sat beside him. "You're not the first black man to be called dangerous just for telling the truth." Jamal chuckled, a tired sound. "Funny. I was the safest guy in the room before all this. Now I'm the target." "That's how you know you're doing it right," she replied. They sipped in silence. Below them, in the faint distance, someone was projecting a message in bold letters on the side of a building. Tanya pointed. "Look," it read, "We see you, Jamal. Keep going." He stared at it for a long moment, eyes misty. A sign, not from the city government or the boardroom, but from the people, from the very crowd he once blended into unnoticed. Now they noticed. Now they followed. And now, he had a lead. He took a deep breath. Tomorrow we meet with the mayor. Tanya nodded. He's scared. That's why he called. Good, Jamal said. Let him be scared. Maybe fear will finally do what morality couldn't. Below, traffic moved on. Lights flickered. The city didn't stop. But in one apartment, on one balcony, a revolution was quietly building momentum, not with weapons or marches, but with vision, conviction, and an unshakable sense of purpose. The real change hadn't been the press conference. It was this. The night after, when the cheering stopped, when the headlines faded, and he was still here, still choosing to fight. The morning of the mayor's meeting arrived with a strange kind of calm. Not the absence of conflict, but the kind of calm that comes before something important. Jamal Carter arrived at City Hall with Tanya and Naomi by his side. His security team cleared the way through a small gathering of reporters outside, their cameras clicking like 1,000 questions fired at once. But Jamal said nothing. His answers weren't meant for the sidewalk. Inside the historic conference room, Mayor Louis Bradford waited. Behind him stood his chief of staff, police union reps, 2 city council members, and a few carefully selected media outlets meant to control the narrative. The mayor forced a smile as Jamal entered. Mr. Carter, thank you for agreeing to meet. Jamal shook his hand firmly. Let's not waste time, Mayor. I'm not here for a photo op. Bradford chuckled nervously, but Jamal didn't laugh. Naomi sat beside him, flipping open a folder marked Carter Framework, Phase 1. Tanya positioned a tablet beside her, already cueing the first presentation slide. Let's begin, Naomi said crisply. We're not here to ask for permission. We're here to offer a plan. What followed was a seismic conversation. Jamal presented not demands, but data. He showed where police budgets had ballooned while school counselors had been cut. He pulled up live heat maps where black and brown communities faced the highest rates of police stops and the lowest clearance rates for actual crimes. He showed where domestic violence calls went unanswered, where mental health crises were criminalized, where officers had filed no disciplinary reports despite dozens of community complaints. Then Naomi took over. She laid out the Carter Framework's 3 pilot zones, all within city jurisdiction: Midtown, South Heights, and Logan Terrace. Each had a tailored public safety redesign plan, community mediators, trauma response teams, civilian oversight boards, and a local recruitment pipeline for residents to train in crisis response. The goal wasn't to erase policing, but to make it obsolete where possible and accountable where necessary. When the mayor's chief of staff interrupted, asking, "Who's going to pay for all this?" Jamal responded calmly, "I am. The first year is covered. After that, we transition to city budgets, but with full transparency and measurable benchmarks." One of the union reps leaned forward. "So you're bypassing the police?" Jamal looked him in the eye. "We're building something that works. If the current system can't adapt, it can step aside." The room went silent. Mayor Bradford cleared his throat. "Let's be honest. You've made waves, Mr. Carter. But replacing a chief and launching programs doesn't solve everything. We're a city, not a startup." Jamal nodded. "Then act like it. Stop managing optics and start serving people." The tension in the room was thick, but something shifted in the mayor's eyes. Maybe it was the clarity of the plan, maybe the public pressure, or maybe, just maybe, it was the undeniable presence of a man who refused to be ignored. After a pause, the mayor exhaled. "Fine. Midtown and South Heights. We'll greenlight the pilots. Logan Terrace. We'll review next quarter." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "All 3 or none, Mr. Mayor." Tanya leaned in, quiet but firm. "You've seen the numbers. Delaying Logan Terrace puts people at risk." The mayor looked at Jamal. 3, Jamal said simply. "Or I walk outside and tell every camera that this administration just rejected the most comprehensive community-led reform plan in the country." Bradford looked down, then nodded. 3 it is." The meeting ended without applause. just signatures, agreements, and quiet disbelief. For the first time in the city's history, a billionaire tech CEO had forced structural reform, not from behind a desk, but from within the system itself. When they walked outside, the crowd of reporters surged again. Mr. Carter, do you feel vindicated? Is this the start of your political career? Do you see yourself replacing Chief Kinley permanently? Jamal stopped at the steps and raised one hand. The microphones tilted toward him. He looked directly into the cameras, his voice clear. I'm not here to wear a badge or run for office. I'm not here for revenge or clout. I'm here because people who look like me are dying in silence. And if I have the power to make noise, then I'll never be quiet again. He continued, this isn't about a party or a title. It's about dignity, accountability, and truth. This city belongs to all of us, not just the ones with yachts and penthouses, but the waitresses, the janitors, the kids walking home from school who shouldn't have to flinch when they see flashing lights. Then he stepped back. No need for more. The crowd clapped on its own. As they returned to Carter Tech headquarters, Naomi looked over at him. You know, you just made more enemies than friends today. Jamal smiled. Good. That means I'm finally doing something right. That night, his inbox overflowed again. Messages from New York, Atlanta, Chicago. Cities wanting to adopt the Carter framework. Communities offering to pilot reforms. Officers asking how they could work under a system like Naomi's. And buried in between, another letter from the same mother as before. This one was shorter. My son came home today and told me he wants to be a lawyer. Said if Mr. Carter can change the rules, maybe I can too. Thank you. You're not just saving lives. You're rewriting what's possible. Jamal sat alone in his office, holding the letter in both hands. He wasn't just rebuilding a city. He was repairing faith. And he wasn't done yet. Months had passed since the day Jamal Carter walked out of City Hall and turned a system on its head. But change wasn't a speech. It wasn't even a press conference or a signature on a reform document. It was the slow grind of culture shifting, brick by brick, heart by heart. And Jamal had stayed at the front of it. The Carter framework was now live in all 3 pilot zones. Midtown saw the first major victory. Crime had dropped by 37%, not because there were more arrests, but because there were fewer reasons for them. Community trauma response teams arrived at domestic violence calls within 7 minutes on average. Conflict mediators, many of whom were formerly incarcerated, were now leading after-school programs that actually kept teens off the streets. In South Heights, something unthinkable had happened. Officers, those who stayed, began asking for the training themselves. They volunteered to be part of the community panels. One sergeant, a white man named Rick Dorsey, stood at a town hall and admitted, I never realized how much fear I walked into a room with. You can't protect people you're afraid of. Applause didn't erase his past, but it opened a door to something new. Logan Terrace had been the toughest. There was resistance, a break-in at a community center, anonymous threats left on Naomi's car, a smear campaign against Tanya, accusing her of bias for her involvement. But the community stood firm. Jamal made sure they were protected, and not just with security guards. He showed up in person, sat with families, walked block by block. I'm not here for a photo, he told one teenager. I'm here because your voice counts more than mine. The boy had nodded. A week later, he joined the Youth Advisory Council. Meanwhile, citywide elections were looming, and the Carter impact was impossible to ignore. Candidates who once avoided him now quoted him. Former critics tried to align themselves with the very reforms they once mocked. Even Mayor Bradford had begun championing the Carter effect, spinning it as a legacy project. But Jamal didn't care who took credit. He wasn't building a brand. He was rebuilding belief. Back at Carter Tech headquarters, Naomi and Tanya had expanded the social impact division. It now had 30 full-time staff. They launched an open-source version of the Carter framework, allowing cities around the world to download and adapt the system to their local needs. A message came in from Johannesburg, another from Detroit. A small town in Mississippi requested training. A mayor in Belgium wanted a call. Jamal was in his office that night, reviewing all the messages, when Tanya knocked lightly. "You're going to want to see this," she said, handing over a tablet. It was a video, a shaky phone recording. It showed a white hostess. Yes, the same woman from the yacht party, now working at a local shelter's fundraising event. In the clip, she handed a plate of food to an unhoused man and said, "Enjoy. Mr. Carter's initiative made this meal possible." The camera panned to the wall, where a mural of Jamal stood, painted by local youth. Below it read, "We rise by lifting others." Jamal stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't feel vengeance or satisfaction, just quiet. Redemption wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was a whisper, a course correction, a second chance given to someone who didn't deserve it, but took it anyway. He leaned back, hands behind his head. Naomi entered the room next. "The mayor wants you to speak at the city's 250th anniversary celebration," she said. "You'll be the closing keynote. Theme is Future of Leadership." Jamal laughed. "They really want me to talk about leadership?" Naomi grinned. "They don't want you. They need you." He thought for a moment. "I'll do it, but not alone." The event arrived a week later. A massive open-air stage had been built downtown, facing a crowd of nearly 10,000. People filled the streets, locals, journalists, politicians, kids on skateboards, barbershop owners, teachers, ministers. When Jamal took the stage, the cheers were deafening. But he held up his hand. "I don't want applause," he said. "I want your attention." He gestured behind him, and a row of people walked out, one by one. A single mother from South Heights, a formerly incarcerated youth from Logan Terrace, an officer from Midtown, a waitress, a Black War veteran, and finally, the young man who once had no safe route to school, now interning in Carter Tech's Justice Division. "They're the real keynote," Jamal said, "because the future of leadership doesn't belong to billionaires. It belongs to communities, to truth-tellers, to people who've been silent so long they learn to scream with action instead of words." He paused. "And sometimes leadership is just showing up after you've been kicked out." The crowd rose to its feet. In that moment, Jamal Carter wasn't the billionaire who'd been embarrassed on a yacht. He wasn't the outsider, the victim, or the headline. He was a mirror, reflecting his city back to itself. Not as it had been, but as it could be. And across the skyline, where construction cranes had once signaled gentrification, they now built youth centers, art walls, and a future where power finally had a conscience. Because Jamal didn't just speak up, he stood up. And in doing so, he made sure no one would ever be told to step off again. At least, not without the whole world watching.